Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Sustain It webinar. Today, as you probably already know because you signed up to it, we will be talking about the new GHG protocol, the new Scope 2 guidance they've given on location and market-based emissions. We'll be talking a little bit about what a Scope 2 emission is, how it all works, and then as well with our colleagues, our friends at Turnkey Solutions, we'll be talking a little bit about how technology and how the right platform can help you manage that transition to a more granular way of reporting. So any second now, I'm sure that my friend Femke from Turnkey will say hello. Or maybe not. But I'm sure she is there, and I'm sure we'll. So if we very quickly start, and we'll go from here. Just a few things of housekeeping because it's always worth doing at the start. We do have time for questions at the end. We roughly break it into 20 minutes. So 20 minutes of me talking, 20 minutes of Femke, and then 20 minutes of questions right at the end. So you will, however, notice you've all been muted. So if you do have questions, please use the chat function. You can send a message to myself, to my colleague Julia, or to Femke directly, and we'll get them at the end. Or you can send it to everybody, and we can all see what you're asking. We do as well record all our sessions, and so not long after the session, will probably be today, it may be tomorrow, depending on how YouTube is doing. It will end up on our YouTube channel, and so it will be available for you there. Hopefully all that makes sense. And if you have any questions at all, obviously, please don't hesitate to ask via that chat function. So we'll start. So as I said, very, very quickly, if we go through what we're going to cover today. So we'll do some introductions, and myself and Femke will let you know who we are and what we're all about. It'll then be me talking, I'm afraid, first, and I'll go through Scope 2 at a very high level. We'll talk a little bit about the new guidance. We'll talk about why it's changing, what is changing, and why we think it's a really interesting transition. I'm then going to pass you over to Femke from Turkey. She'll talk to you about how you can adapt what you're doing, give you some ideas of how this would look in an actual living system, and hopefully all that will make sense. And then, as I said, at the end, plenty of time for questions, which we always find there are, so that's always great. So Femke, if I pass over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. That is great. So thank you, first of all, Joe, for inviting us, and I will be giving an introduction a bit on what Turnkey Solutions is and how the new Scope 2 guidance will work within our platform. I am the product director of Turnkey Solutions, and Turnkey Solutions is a web-based sustainability platform. Our platform assists companies with managing data and information from their own operations, and for companies they work with, their suppliers, their logistics partner, so that you can have a full overview for strategic decision making, risk management, and the total CSR compliance. We started in Hong Kong in 2009, and we now have offices around the world, including Singapore, London, Copenhagen, and New York. And I am personally based in London. Our product constantly evolves with the requirements of companies that we work with, and with changing legislation. And of course, that's why we're here. Looking at how the new Scope 2 can work also within the Turnkey Solutions platform. You can see a couple of the companies that we work with here in the corner. We're working with a broad range of industries and companies, but very much focused on not just what's happening in your headquarters in one location, but really having the whole overview required for full Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. if you could go to the next slide, Jill. Thank you. So we know we have, of course, there are other sustainability software solutions in the market, and we pride ourselves to very much focus on these 3 points. First of all, to be affordable. So comparing with other software houses, we are low priced and very much focused on making it possible for suppliers, entities that you work with or part of your organization or external to also use the platform so that they can all be part of the sustainability platform or the sustainability program. At the same time, we offer great service in setting up the platform, emission factor updates, and also training. We have a strong reporting tool that then, with all the data that is collected, makes it possible to have a good overview for the customer, but also for the individual entities to see how they're doing, maybe comparing with a factory that is close by or other entities of the organization, so that you can really have them also part of your program. The main focus of our tool is that you have your network, and that is how we develop the platform to make that possible, that you're all working together to make the sustainability program a success, and have then the full overview for you. So if can we then go to the next slide? Thank you. So our key strengths are also that you can use metrics and currencies and different languages in the platform that then are centralized into one for whoever is logging in and who wants to look at the data and the reports. This comes also, of course, with being in so many different locations where you might have a customer based in Europe with a lot of the supply chain in Asia or South America that are working in their own metrics, working in their own language to make that happen. We also do EDI integrations with existing platforms or tools that you might have in your organization, so that you really reduce the amount of manual input. And we configure our platform, so we're not a static system. There is a fixed platform that you can use, and with the different modules out there. But for a lot of the customers, we make specific modules because all organizations are different, and they are reporting in a different way and have different requirements, and we pride ourselves to do that quickly and make these changes and not be fixed and static. So we continue to develop our platform as we have done since 2009 and evolve with the different requirements. So we're excited to show how the Scope 2 changes can be easily managed within our platform, and how that works in the back end, so you have a good overview of how Turnkey Solution works. Okay, thanks, Joe.
No problem at all. So it's unfortunately back to me now for a little while. So that's Turnkey, and obviously from our perspective, it's always nice to have these opportunities to talk with various different software platforms, and this is just another part of what we do. So if we talk for a little bit about who Sustainit are and what we do. So Sustainit are a sustainability data consultancy is the term we use. We work with various software platforms, and including Turnkey, obviously including guys like Enablon and CR360 and Cloud Apps and others. And I know that there's, from the list of people who will join, there's a few people who we know from those kind of discussions. We work with our clients and with those software providers to help get the best data possible, and that involves understanding information, understanding how it's used, and understanding how it flows. So the process of data going from very much the coal face right the way up to corporate level reporting and how it's used throughout that value chain. I mean, for me, this is quite a nice slide, and this is based on some of the numbers from last year. There were 2,000 users reporting on this sustainability over 190 countries. I mean, the real estate and the landscape and the scope of our clients and the data that they gather is huge, and obviously that kind of feeds into the 14 million tons of CO2 emissions being monitored through our customers and through the work we help them with. So all good fun. So without dwelling too long on who we are, because we don't want to spend too long on that, we'll talk now about Scope 2 emissions and new guidance. And if you've ever been on a webinar with me, you'll know that I am a little bit obsessed by Lego. So unsurprisingly, there's a picture of Lego. So very quickly at the start, we want to talk a little bit about what is actually a Scope 2 emission. I think it's important to be really clear. I don't want to spend too long on it because I'm sure most of you already have this information in your heads. But it is still worth being clear as to what exactly a Scope 2 emission is versus Scope 1 or Scope 3. So one of the best ways I hear this kind of the breakdown between emissions described a few years back is very simple, which is that if you burn it on site or on property that you own, then it's a Scope 1 emission. If you absolutely can't live without it, but you don't generate emissions on site, then it's Scope 2. And if it's anything else, it's Scope 3. And we'll leave Scope 3 alone because I can and have, and I'm sure will again in the future, talk for hours on end about Scope 3 emissions and why I find those particularly exciting. And that's not what we're talking about today. So Scope 2 emissions basically comes down to three things. It comes down to electricity, steam, and especially in Scandinavia, though increasingly across Europe, district heating. It's if you're using energy, but you don't generate that energy on site. And whilst we can talk about steam and we can talk about district heating, the one thing we end up talking about the most is electricity, because that's pretty important in the world today, and so it's where most of our Scope 2 emissions come to. And the third point is obviously important. About a third of total carbon emissions are categorized as Scope 2. It's a huge chunk of the world's global emission footprint. It's a huge chunk of the emissions for pretty much everybody we will ever work with, and everybody who ever kind of plugs anything in ever. So it's a big part of the emission profile. So being able to report on that data effectively, being able to talk about that data accurately is obviously really very important. So reducing Scope 2 emissions, I mean, this really isn't telling anybody anything they don't know. There's three ways of doing it. Up to now there have been three ways. There's energy conservation. Oh, that's simple. It's turning off the plug. It's switching off the lights when you leave the office, which not everybody does. It's pretty simple stuff, and it is that low-hanging fruit that everyone goes for. There's efficiency upgrades. Obvious examples would be things like switching to LED lights. Again, it's a great way of reducing Scope 2 emissions, but neither of those are really covered by this location and market-based switch. It's the third one that does, and that's better, and in inverted commas, better energy sourcing. So this ties into the idea of finding new ways to source your energy. In the UK and across Europe, and indeed globally, there are now many more choices when it comes to where you get your electricity from. The obvious example from a home use perspective is you can buy your electricity from one of the big four, big three, big four. There's a question from my head. Energy providers in the UK, or you can buy green tariff electricity from a smaller company, somebody like Better Energy or Good Energy or ecometricity. So there's all kinds of sources, and that's the kind of thing we're talking about. We're also, when we move into businesses, obviously talking about something that's a lot more detailed, and it's things like having power agreements or contracts or EPA certificates. It's about sourcing your energy in a different way. And for me, this is probably one of the the more interesting ways of reducing scope 2 emissions, because it's not a process that involves turning off plugs or large capex projects to put new kit on the roof or to strip out old inefficient lighting or heating systems. It's just about making choices when it comes to getting energy that will reduce your emissions. So what is the new guidance? So this came out in January 2015, so we've had a little while to digest it. And it outlines how to report more effectively on the true emissions of operations. And they use that term quite liberally throughout the whole thing. For me, what's really interesting is that the CDP questionnaire has been updated to align with the new guidance. So when people start getting their CDP questionnaires in, you will be able to use this location and market-based emission framework to report your data. So it's built in. It's going to obviously have an impact from that. I think I think the fact that so many companies now have to choose to report to CDP means that their adoption of this is a really good, interesting sign. And certainly the vast majority of our clients who we work with on their Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions reporting are talking to us about this in one form or another. So let's get into both. What is a market-based emission? So as we said, most Scope 2 emissions up to now have used what we would call national level emission factors. So if you're reporting your Scope 2 emissions, then typically at the end of the year, when it comes time to work it out, you look at the electricity you've used. You will find on either the GHG protocol website or the WRI spreadsheet or through the DEFRA spreadsheets that come out every year that are getting better and better, you will find the emission factor for each country that you operate in. You will times the electricity by that, and that will give you the amount of CO2 produced. Nice, simple, easy, but a little bit too simple. We already know that suppliers' own emissions can be significantly different. If they're sourcing electricity using low carbon choices, and so obviously nuclear being the option there when I'm going to say low carbon, but also renewable energy, wind, solar. I know obviously Apple have made an awful lot of noise about the fact they source 100% of their electricity for their data centers from renewable sources. I haven't drilled into that, so I'm not going to say how effective that is for them. But anyway, those kind of choices can have a huge effect on your true emissions. But under the WR guidance thus far, until you switch to location and market-based, you really don't get credit for those changes. You have to report your emissions using the national level. So your emissions can be significantly different to actually what you're reporting them as. Contractual instruments and direct contracts can also mean your emissions don't align with national emission factors. So again, if you've got direct agreements, if you've got and this is the term that is used throughout the guidance, so it's one that's worth drilling into. I'm not going to do it here because we can spend, I think, too long doing that. But it's about contractual instruments, contracts or agreements that are set up between yourself and your various suppliers that state this is what we're getting and this is the emission factor for that. And it's those that are important. So that kind of defines what market-based is. So what do these changes mean and why is it important? This was one of the questions that I remember getting asked when we first looked at this, and so I've left it in as a nice big header. Do you have to report two numbers? Yeah, pretty much. But I think the value there is really implicit throughout, because by switching to location and market-based emissions, you have the opportunity to talk about the changes you're making to how you're sourcing your energy. And as I said, it doesn't require a reduction in usage. It doesn't require a huge project. It just requires that additional bit of that embedding of sustainability into the thought process, into the purchasing process for energy. And I think it's one of the more interesting ways to change your emissions. It gives you clarity on how to report on non-standard electricity purchases. And for me, this is it. It gives you recognition of the positive energy choices that are made by your company. It shows that you have chosen to do these things. And I think that really is one of the key parts to a more sustainable strategy. Is if you can show that you are embedding your decisions with sustainability, then there's an awful lot of good news to be talked about there. So, location-based and market-based emissions. Essentially, as we said, the location-based is the old way of doing it. So, if you're in a country, you have the local emission factor, you times your electricity use by that, and that becomes the emission factor there. Market-based, there's a hierarchy as well. So let's talk a little bit about those very quickly. So location-based, and this is quite a simple table when you go down the list, is you will choose, if you can, regional or subnational emission factors. I always talk about Alberta and British Columbia when I do this, because they're two states or two provinces of Canada, I need to get that right, right next to each other, which have quite different regional emission factors. If you don't have those, go to national, and again, things like the WRI spreadsheets, DEFRA spreadsheets will all have these, and that's your location-based emissions. Very, very simple. Market-based is more complicated. So EACs, so energy attribute certificates, PPEs, PPAs, EPA, European Purchase Agreements, EPAs. There's all kinds of abbreviations, and I don't want to spend any time, to be honest, talking through those. If you have a look at the summary guidance the WRI put out, it goes into all those. But essentially, it's energy attribute certificates. Then you've got contracts from specified sources. And finally, before you get back to location-based, you've got supplier and utility emission rates. So certainly in the UK and across the EU, most suppliers will be able to give you their emission factor. And that, as far as this guidance is concerned, is preferable to the location-based emissions because there is more nuance there. Even in the UK, there's actually quite a bit of fluctuation between the big energy providers as to where they source how they generate their energy and the carbon intensity of that energy. So even that is a better choice than the residual mix, the location-based emission. So there we go. So what are the things to remember? The obvious one is this: make sure your contractual instruments are up to scratch. Make sure that the agreements you have and the certificates that you have are up to date. Make sure that they will stand up to examination, because they will need to be looked at to make sure they're working properly. You will need to recalculate your baseline. Obviously, the ability to compare eggs with eggs is vital. So you will need to go back and have a look at your baseline again, which is always a fun exercise for anyone who's got 6 or 7 years worth of data. But from our perspective, it shows that transition. It gives us the opportunity to show how, over the course of a few years, better choices and more sustainability strategy embedded in energy sourcing has had an impact in carbon. So from my perspective, I think it's a really good exercise to do, though not the most exciting one in the world. And companies can choose which approach they use for target and or benchmark purposes. So when it comes to setting targets, which I would imagine in your corporate reports or internally, then you can choose if you're going to use location and market-based emissions. Again, for me, using the market-based framework will mean that you've got the ability to show a greater commitment to sustainability and to better energy sourcing. For me, it's also more detailed. It gives you more granularity to data. I like it. Before I sign off, and before I hand back over to Femke, I nicked this straight out of the Scope 2 guidance documents, but I thought it's a really nice example and a really good illustration of exactly what the reporting looks like once you've switched over to this framework. And you can see it there. You've got 100% of USA's emissions being covered by RECs. You've got PPAs covering some of the work in India, some of the work in Mexico, and you've got China doing exactly what you'd expect it to. But at the end of the day, it's two numbers. The important thing there is nearly 100, in this example, nearly 100 megatons of CO2 dropping out of the emissions portfolio through better reporting. And I think for me that is the key thing. It's about better and more granular reporting of your actual emissions rather than just a number times by some by a national average that doesn't reflect your own behavior or your own commitment to sustainability. And obviously, those are two things that are very important to be covered. So the great news is I have finished talking now for a little while, and I am going to pass you over to Femke, who will pick up from here. So Femke, if I switch now and make you the presenter, and you can run your slides.
Okay, thank you. Okay, how's that? Okay, I think we're on, Joe. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Great. So yeah, as Joe said, it's about better and more detailed reporting. But I can imagine that the first time you're reading about scope 2 changes, you would think, okay, another change, more work. I can imagine that, and I would like to show you with this presentation about the Turnkey Solutions software, how easy it actually can be to monitor both the location and the market-based, and be able to use that in your CSR reporting, your management reporting, to actually show not only the changes you make in the reduction of electricity, but also the choices you've made in maybe different locations where you can make those choices to reduce emissions, also based on the provider that you that you're working with. So the slide that I'm currently showing is what you would see if you're logging into our web-based tool. You can see three graphs. This one displays different types of usage, emission, cost throughout an organization. The top one comparing 4 different vessels, left one down the different warehouses and how their consumption is going over the different months, and you have a water consumption report on the bottom right. Now, this is a representation of what you could see when you log into our platform, but it completely depends on who you are, what kind of data you have access to, and what kind of modules are relevant to you. So depending on who you log into, you can see something completely different here. And of course, they get updated with new data added to the platform. Also on the top, you can see the different pillars, the dashboard, monitoring, reports. Again, they depend on who you are as a user. On the top right, you can see who is logged in. This is a general admin account, someone that has access to a lot of different modules, and then all the way on the top right, you can see that you can change languages. So depending on your preferred language, you can see this in, for example, Spanish, simplified, traditional Chinese, and other languages. So this is just to show you a general overview, and I will go more into detail of the different modules that we offer. So if I show you the next slide, you can see drop-down boxes of our tool with different modules that we offer and that you can report with. So a lot will be familiar to you or working with GRI or CDP, the required monitoring that most companies have in terms of what we're talking about here: electricity, water, of course, materials that you buy, recycling that you do, fuel that you use, which are relevant to most organizations. Then you have modules that we have that are very specific for certain industries related to refrigerants, lubricants, detergents that might not be relevant to some but very relevant to others and very high on emissions as well. So definitely up there to report on. On the bottom right you can see that we have logistics modules which are I think increasingly important where also with the GRI 4 where you're much more focused on the scope 3 where you can actually, if you're using an outsourcing logistics to ocean freight providers, road provider or air freight, you can actually monitor that there and have them actually input data or do it yourself and have that with your CSR efforts. You can also, if you have your own logistics network, you can use them for that and actually report on all your logistics efforts for your own customers if they're asking for that. So a broad range of modules available, and of course we're focusing today on electricity, but just to show you a few more whereby we, for example, also build modules on sustainable fishing. Which is, of course, a hot topic on the moment as well. If you're using that either in your product offering or if you're working in that field. For example, we're working with fines, but also with all the, if your suppliers have to work with ISO certification, requirements surrounding GRI, CDP, you can really look at all the modules that are relevant to you and pick and choose which one are relevant to your organization, and that's the one you would then see when you log into our platform, and that's the one that you can use. So all is of course running online so that you can have access anywhere you would like to have that from different devices, and also that it's not just a software tool that you use within your headquarters, but one that can be accessed throughout the world of the organizations that you work with. That's just a general overview, and now we're going more specific into the Scope 2 requirements. So how we work with our platform is that you would have a company overview set up by us for your organization. This is just an example where you have a headquarter based in Hong Kong, you have different plants that are owned by you, you have different logistics offices around the world, and you also have your suppliers in there that are monitoring for you. Now, each of these locations you can set targets for, you can look at intensity factors based on the size or the amount of people that they have working with you, with this then you can also look at how the different Scope 2 electricity market or location-based factors are working towards your emission. So you can really look at your whole organization, and with this company structure, you would then add information to each of these of the tree of the hierarchy that you can see here. So if I'll just work with an example to show you how it can work with the market and the location-based emissions. So I've just chosen, I'm from the Netherlands myself, so I've chosen a location in the Netherlands, a data center that you might have, and with the number of employees, quite a big size location. And in the Netherlands you do have the choice of electricity provider, and you can make certain decisions that would lower your emissions besides just turning off the light and being efficient with your computers in the data center. So adding this information to it, you would also have information in there on your contracts that you might have with a different provider. Again, as Joe also mentioned, it might be very relevant for some of your operations. For others, in for example, where we are headquarters, Hong Kong, we just don't have that option to choose. Then you would just have to go with the regional emission factor that you would have on Hong Kong Island, for example. Anyway, in the Netherlands you have, so I choose to work with an example of Green Choice, which is one of the providers that you can choose, and they give you an overview of how they provide the electricity with, in this case in 2014, with a lot of biomass and some wind energy. So if you are able to have a contract with Green Choice, you can really specifically see how they provide your electricity, and they will provide with an emission factor as well for this, which will be quite different from the DEFRA emission factor from the Netherlands, which will be based on the main electricity provider. So you have a contract with this, and then how you would work with that in the platform is that adding an electricity bill to our platform can work in two different ways. So the first one I'll show you is if you actually manually input a bill. You would, for example, have a bill of a couple of months, 2.5 months usually. You choose the top end is the consumer, is which location you add for, so it's for an office in the Netherlands. And you choose the start date and the end date of that bill, and you pick the provider. So in this case, that's Green Choice. And you can also add the costs so that you can report on the costs of that provider as well, which might be more expensive than the general electricity provider in the Netherlands. And you can also add the bill to that. So you really have all the information together. If you save this, so you click Create Electricity Consumption, it adds a line item to the database, and then with that the reports get updated, and you can create and slice and dice with this data. With our platform, it's also possible to, besides manual input and also connecting it maybe with an existing building management system, it's possible to upload with Excel. And I think this is a great feature of our platform, which also makes it possible to change between software providers, so that you can actually upload existing data that you might have, so that you don't have to start from scratch. So here you can see that we have 8 line items of bills in the Netherlands with different dates, electricity provided by Green Choice. Now, this Excel sheet that you can see the top of here is based on a template that you can download from the platform. So you download a template that already has drop-down boxes in there. So it has which providers you can choose from, it has which offices you work with specifically for you as a login. So it doesn't show up the whole organization, just what you, what is relevant to you. So if you then add the bills or have that in an Excel sheet, you can import that. It checks the errors. If you have, for example, typed an end date and the start date the wrong way around, which is not possible, and then the tool says, okay, this you should change this, and so it checks on the errors. Then if everything is okay, you can confirm it, and it in one go gets added to the platform database, and then again the reports get dated. So this is another way of providing the Turnkey Solutions platform with data. And if we look at the next slide, is basically how then the database looks like. How does the data form will be displayed? So here in this view, I've actually show you the 2 different scope 2 data that is in the platform. So it's both the location and the market base shown in one screen. So you can pick and choose what you want to show. Of course, you can see the top bar here gives you a lot of different options on what you want to show in this this overview. But this is what I've done here. You can see the different type of emissions between looking at location and market-based. I've made the difference quite big just to give you a good overview of how it will look like. but it might be smaller in reality. So you can see from each of these entries you have a location and a market-based overview with different emissions, and and of course the cost is there provided as well. You can drill down and open up one of these items, and you can add comments. For example, if you have information about a new air conditioning system, or you've changed something, you can actually add that in so that you can have a full overview. And of course you can add the bills so that if an auditor comes in, they can just log into the platform and get an overview, so you don't have to go back to your files or your Excel sheet for them. So this is the kind of data input here that you can see. Now, how does that work on the back end? So we're actually, as an organization, we help always with the emission factors. So we actually update emission factors for companies on a yearly basis. So that is part of our service, but all the organizations that sign up to Turnkey Solutions have access to where this data, where is the emission factors come from. Maybe organizations want to work with different emission factors, they can do that, and we input them for them. So you can really control this, and of course that's important for your CSR report, but also for auditors that might be involved. So here you can see that the market-based emission factor is 0.21392, and that is then based on emission unit of kilograms, and the consumption is kilowatts hours. But if you then have someone in the Netherlands that wants to add the consumption in a different unit, is possible, and it gets converted back automatically. So here you can add the information of where the data comes from. You can, for example, add the web link or a remark or a file that to show you where you have this information from, where the green choice emission factor is from. So you really have a record of your information, which, as Joe said, also is of course required if you want to do proper market-based reporting. Then, because you have to do both, as you say, 2 times reporting, you also have to do location-based. So here the DEFRA number 0.39 as an emission that is just based on general electricity providers in the Netherlands. Again, with the web link where you can look back at where the information is coming from. What we see a lot with companies that are changing from monitoring in Excel to monitoring in a platform is that one of the reasons is that a lot of the information they can't trace back to where they got it from. You solve that solution with this type of software. So now you have one location in the Netherlands that is reporting both on their market-based, based on their green choice number, and the location-based, based on DEFRA emission factors. Now, this is a view of how you can actually set up a report. So first, the first screen showed you the dashboard of the different types of reports. This is the way these reports are being set up. And then once you've set them up once, or once we set them up for you once, they get updated automatically. So you don't constantly have to do that, but just to show you how you can then really develop and slice and dice the data the way you would want it. You can see here the red box shows the provider. So you can see, okay, I want to, if you click on it or multi-select a market-based or a location-based provider, you can pop them into one graph together or only report on one and then add it up to other locations where you might maybe only have a location-based number. You can really add up, compare, and in that way use the data for your sustainability report or other types of reporting that you might need. The lowest row basically shows how the report is going to look like. So we're looking at, with this one, we're looking at count by, we're looking at emissions, the total emissions. We want to show in the table in the report which scope we're looking at, what type of consumption. So you might want to have an emission report that not only includes electricity, but also maybe gas or other types of monitoring aspects. We want to see the providers, and we want to do that on a quarterly basis. Always when you create these type of reports, the platform provides you with a table and with a chart, so you can choose what kind of chart you would want to see. Here you can see that we choose to make a stacked bar chart, where there's a lot of different options. And within the table you can choose to add up the columns and the rows as well, so you really have a good overview. So this is really to show you also a bit of, if you're a super user in our platform, this is the things that you can build and do. And then if you log in as a supplier or as an entity that might not be in the headquarters, you just see the report overview always until a certain day. You can say, okay, always show until last week or last month, depending, or maybe today, or what is relevant to you. And only with the data that you have access to. So if I already said that you always get a table and a chart, so this is a table that you will be able to see if you're saying, I want to look at both location and market-based, just to see the comparison, if there is a difference between the two. In this case, the difference is quite big. So looking at scope 2, as you can see from one location in the Netherlands over different months in 2015. Now this is the chart that you could, for example, show where you compare the two market-based and location-based setup, which of course show the same line because they're the same consumption, but the emissions are significantly different. So all these charts you can then download and use again, and the same actually with the tables. You can export them to Excel or to PDF if you want to use them in different ways, or publish them maybe. Then a different types of report, for example, if you want to add different emissions to it, you don't only want to look at electricity, but also on fuel and electricity consumption of a different location, just adding a couple of overviews together. So here we've only, in the terms of the providers, said, okay, we will only want to look at the market-based aspect of the Netherlands, and then it shows you that. The chart is a stacked bar chart whereby you can see an overview of 3 different locations in our organization. So that is, you can really pick and choose how you want to show, but in a way the monitoring on the front end stays the same. By choosing the right provider and having the back end set up properly that you would want to report on both, you actually, on the monitoring front, on the front end, where you add an electricity bill, nothing is actually changing. It just changes it once you want to create a report. You have to know, of course, the difference. What do I want to see in this report? How do I want to report on it? What is relevant to what I want to show to my management, to my stakeholders, to the CSR report, to the auditor, to show the right overview. So this is actually then you have an additional number, you have additional information, not just on reducing your own electricity, but you also have information about your choices that you've made in electricity providers, but you don't have the extra work in terms of the reporting. So that's what I wanted to show you. You can find more information about us here on this website, and also through our email address if you would like to reach out to us. Thanks, Joe.
But you couldn't hear me. Okay. Thank you very much, Graham. Okay, sorry about that. I must have missed the demute button. Um,
That's okay. Thank you.
so, yes. So we've got 10 minutes left, which is brilliant, which means we have enough time for questions, which is always good, which means that I haven't talked for too long, which is even better. Um, I mean, from my perspective, I think one of the lovely things about working at Sustain It, and without getting too kind of effusive, is that because we work with a lot of different software providers, because we're very independent in that regard, we do get to see how different platforms approach the same problem, and it's always nice to see that, you know, no one answer is universal. And to me, I think, you know, I like what Turnkey does. I like how it approaches this new challenge. I have to be honest, I like how some of the other softwares do it too, but I like most of all that I get to see how the different softwares are answering these problems. So if you do have questions, please use the chat function. It's there so that you can ask us the questions and we'll go through them. So ones that we've got right from the start, which is probably quite important to cover, which is very simple, which is what if you have sites that cannot get market submissions? And I think this is kind of touched on a little bit in the example provided by the WRI, where they show kind of China as having an NA. But obviously, it's more than just one country. You know, there are sites where we know people are going to struggle to find out exactly what the emission factor for that site is. Either it's in a country that doesn't give you much information, or it's a small site that doesn't have somebody engaged at site level who can get you that information. And in which case, I think kind of the league table of market emissions is really invaluable, because you're able to just go down the list and go, okay, well, we can't do that, we can't do that. And at the very end, you come to essentially back to the market-based emissions. So it may well be that as you kind of go across a list of sites, and for some reason I'm drawing on a piece of paper, which I really know none of you can see, but I can't help myself. You go through the site and say, okay, well, for them, we've got PPAs. For these guys, we've got an EPC. For these guys, we have back to location-based emissions. For these guys, we've got supplier. And all of those will be fine for the market-based reporting framework, because it's about choosing the best possible. And for some sites, for some countries, then the best possible is going to be location-based emissions, and that's all you're going to be able to do. But for where it is possible to get more accurate data that reflects the choices you've made in terms of energy sourcing, or reflects the agreements you have in place, then you have the opportunity to use those. And it's, again, it's about giving you guys credit to do that. Okay, I think one of the nice things about questions is it always gives two people the opportunity to express opinions, which are mostly similar. But I don't know if you have any comments against that.
Yeah, I mean, we have the difficulty definitely in Asia, where I mean, I was recent. I've been for 4 years as well in Hong Kong, and there's just no other option in Hong Kong. If you're on the islands or you're not, or you're on the mainland, you have one provider you can choose from, and really only if, of course, if you build your own wind turbine or solar. Electricity, then you'll be able to have a different emission factor. So pretty limited in some location, and yeah, at the moment as a not too large or yeah, as a company, you can't do anything about that. But there is a lot of locations around the world where you can, and a lot more, I think, than people that are not in this industry think. Luckily, there's options, especially in Europe, where you can pick and choose, and you really can make a difference in your emissions. But not easy everywhere around the world. Absolutely.
No, I absolutely agree, and that kind of reflects certainly my experience as well of some of the. Anyway, we can talk about that quite a lot. So another question I have here, which is, how do you make sure that you're reporting using the right emission factor? Femke, do you want to talk a little bit about how you do that within Turnkey?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, before this guidance came out, we've always tried to look at the most specific emission factor we could find. And to be fair, then you go with an emission factor from the electricity provider, which you still can't check. I mean, you still go with what they provide. And I think that was why their GHG has decided to kind of do both, because there were so many differences in how companies were doing this, because we've also worked with clients that said, no, we just want to go with DEFRA because at least then we can have one method around the world, rather than working with really all this location. We don't know how trustworthy it is and how much information we actually get. Are they from the relevant year? Because a lot of times also, even though it is provided as the 2015 or 2016 emission factor, if you dig deeper, you can actually see that they're referring to something in 2012. So you always have to be careful and really look at what is it that they're providing with. So a bit of caution there, I think. I mean, as a software house, we do offer that service to research and investigate the emission factors. Eventually, it's up to the customer which one eventually they want to decide to work with. So they might still we might still offer an option and say, okay, you can do this, but it might be more specific, that you can do the other one, which is less specific, but at least you know it's from a trustworthy source, for example, and then they decide which one to go with. We see that the certification companies and the audit organizations that they work with, the big ones, are usually, have always been accepting of that, because they know that it's not always easy to choose and find the right emission factor. I don't know how you see that, Joe. But...
No, I think that, I mean, without going into too much, I think that kind of ties into something that I see quite often in terms of sustainability reporting, which is that, globally there is a recognition that, you know, the rules change on a daily basis. I mean, and this is going a little bit off topic, but this is unfortunately the kind of thing I do. But transparency is very much its own reward. The fact is that if companies report in a very transparent way and say, look, these are the emissions as far as we understand them now. This is our methodology. This is what we're doing to manage that. Then I think there's an awful lot of goodwill that then becomes available. The fact is, if you're really clear about what you're doing and how you're trying to do it and how you're trying to get to a point where sustainability is as embedded as it can be and is as key a part of the decision-making process as it can be, then I think you get an awful lot of credit for that, as you should. I realize I've kind of swung quite wildly away from how do you make sure that you're reporting using the right emission factors, but it's about transparency. And I think that really works in a positive way if you have that in place. I mean, I think my experiences very much mirror yours in terms of how people look at emission factors, and there are all kinds of fun and games to be had with making sure you've got the right one, making sure it's accurate, making sure that the residual mix is the right one for the year you're in. I mean, DEFRA's own methodologies only changed last year to actually be, I think, suitably up to date in that regard. Yeah, it's good fun stuff. And again, I think it's something that we've helped our clients with over the years, and I'm sure we will continue to do so. But it's just about being informed and making the decisions that allow you to talk as accurately as you can about the data you've got access to. And that's why I really like how location and market-based emissions do that. Like I said right at the start, they allow you to take credit for the good decisions you're making. We are now out of time, and if there's one thing that I know about our webinars is that I am not allowed to go over. It's the one rule I'm not allowed to break. So we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to yourself and your colleagues at Turnkey for joining and for putting on the slides and for putting up with my prattling.
Thank you very much for having us.
Um, unsurprisingly, we'll follow up with everybody. We'll check in, make sure you enjoy the content. It will be on YouTube very soon, and I still haven't adjusted to the fact I have to say that, despite the fact I'm now in my 40s. Uh, if you do have any questions, please feel free to follow up either with myself or my colleagues or with them or with hers. I'm sure we'd be happy to talk no matter who you speak to. Uh, if you have any suggestions for the next webinars, then please feel free to get in touch. I know we're doing one on, I believe, the 1st of March, where we'll be talking about modern slavery and supply chain data, which is another nice, simple, and easy topic. So that will be probably another hour of us talking. We're doing that one in association with CR360. Uh, yes, thank you very much for your time, everybody. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, no matter where you are. And I'm sure we'll speak to you all very, very soon. Okay, goodbye.